Okay, you're live.
Greetings, everybody. This is the Annapolis Transportation Board convening, and I'd like to welcome all members and especially the new members. Those appearing for the first time with us are Vince Harriman and John Purnell. And welcome indeed. You still have this formality of the swearing in to occur, but meanwhile, I'm happy that you are here, and we will proceed. There's been some confusion for which we all apologize regarding scheduling caused by the holiday yesterday and multiple boards and commissions, or rather multiple city events taking place. But we got this started and we'll do the best we can. I will start with the agenda. You've all been sent the agenda. And so what I need to do with you at this point is to let's see, we have the roll call. But would somebody be willing to take notes for us for this meeting until we, there's Zoe in video.
Can an unsworn person do that?
Sure.
All right, I'll try and help out.
All right, that's great. If you would keep a log, first of all, of who is here, and that should be evident from the screen. And that appears to be David DeQuinzio, Kurt Riegel, Carol Kelly, John Purnell, Vince Harriman, Zoe Johnson, and Elvia Thompson. Oh, Zoe's on twice, I see. For some reason, your phone is still logged in. All right.
Kurt, this is Elvia. I did not get the agenda.
Oh, my goodness. I did send it around.
Nor did I, Kurt. This is Carol.
That's odd.
I assume it's the same one from December that was canceled.
It is. If you don't mind my waiting for just a moment, I will resend it. It's really more or less the same agenda that we have been following. All right. Oh boy. All right, well, let me resend the thing right now. It's easy for things to get lost, and for that I apologize. So this is going to no. Nothing is simple. It's going to Elvia. And who else didn't get it? Zoe?
And Carol.
Carol. There, it has gone to both of you now. All right, starting with the agenda then. We've had the call to order, the roll call. The first thing to do is to approve the agenda, which is very simple. We have no speaker this week, and there's very little new action. And so I would like to, if you do have adjustments to the agenda, let me know about them right now. I have just a couple myself. We need to add to this meeting election of officers, which include president, vice president, and secretary for the Transportation Board. And I'd like to have a brief discussion about speakers for the future. We have no speaker today, and I'd like to get to that. So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right. And a second from somewhere, I guess I will second if nobody
I'll second
else.
it.
All right. And vote to approve. There appear to be 4, at least maybe 5. So the agenda is approved. Minutes for last meeting were also distributed. Thank you so much, Elvia, for putting that together. I put the polishing touches on it, complete with links to all of the items referred to in the agenda, and some of which are now lodged on our Google Drive. It's very nice to have this Google Drive available to us to lodge large documents and those things which are not conveniently attached directly to the minutes. I've made the Google Drive open to everybody in the world for agenda and minutes. The other items in the Google Drive are somewhat more restricted to members of the board. And as you look at that, you can come back and suggest. I'm always in favor of opening up as much as possible to everybody, but I thought I would check with the board to find out whether it is your sentiment also that everything else on the Google Drive should be open to the general public. They are working documents, and I don't believe we are obliged to make working documents available to the public. I have no objection to it personally, but I will go with the sentiment of the board. Does anyone have a feeling on this?
Government business, it should be open.
Okay. Is there any objection to opening up everything on the Google Drive to the general public? Hearing none, I will do that. All right. The next thing is election of officers for this year, 2021. And the officers are president, vice president, and secretary. I apologize if you have not had time to consider this, but everybody is eligible to serve in all of those positions. And so I suggest that we start cycling through these. We have a quorum and can act on this now. I wish more members were present, but they aren't. Before I start in going through those 3 officers, is there any discussion? Hearing none. Are there nominations for the president of the board?
Kurt, are we calling it president now and not chair?
I'm sorry, it is chair. You're right.
Okay,
I'm connected to too many other organizations.
right. I would nominate Kurt to continue as chair.
All right.
Would second that nomination.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Could I have a vote of yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay.
All right. The majority appearing to be present. I thank you for your vote of confidence and will not abscond with our treasury funds. The next position presently occupied by Beth Dolezal is the vice chairman of the board. Do I hear nominations for vice chair?
Know if she wants to continue?
I have, she has not communicated yay or nay on whether she wants to continue. And I feel a little bit bad about that. I wouldn't mind deferring our acting on that position for a meeting if you think that that's a good thing to do. But I will go with the sentiment of the group.
I think it's appropriate to defer until she can attend.
All right, is everybody fine with that?
Mhm.
We shall defer election of vice chair then until the next meeting. And the secretary, this is the only truly important role that we have to fill. And I earnestly entreat you all to nominate somebody, especially yourself, for secretary. how does one generate pressure?
Volunteer / nominate myself. I know I'm new and it's my first night, but I can work, so.
My gratitude overflows. I'm very, very happy. Thank you, Vince, for doing that. And will you be spending more time in town?
I will. I have a couple more months in New Jersey, but hopefully by the end of March, I'll be done with New Jersey.
Okay. Well, we are near neighbors, but I don't think we've actually met in the flesh before.
That's right.
Thanks very much. So there is a nomination. Second, I will second it if nobody else. And can we vote on whether Vince Harriman will be secretary? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It appears to be unanimous. Thank you so much. Next item on the agenda, the modified agenda, is speakers. I just want to ask you please to nominate speakers who might appear at our meetings in the future. I've been bringing people in since we began at the first of the year, but I'd really like to widen the circle of speakers who are invited to appear before us. And as we go more public, it would be nice to draw in a larger public audience as well. So please, if you would just send me suggestions for speakers, take the initiative, invite speakers on your own if you think that they would contribute usefully to the work of the board. Any other discussion on future possible speakers before we move on?
No, but my question for John is, should I take over on the notes, or would you like to continue for tonight for one night only?
Thank you, John.
I'll do a one night stand. Thank you, Vince. I'm sort of got a flow going, and it'd be nice if we stuck it all together in one crazy format.
Yep.
That's great. I've acted in that role myself on several occasions. Okay, it's John for this meeting, Vince for the next and following. No other comments on speakers. This is the segment reserved for comments by members of the public.
I do have a question on speakers, Kurt. What is it that you're looking for?
Basically, anything is fair game. We have a list of priorities that have been articulated and discussed by members of the board up to this point, which I will send to you with an invitation to add your own. And anybody who can speak to those priorities or to things of general interest to the board, I think would be useful. In the past, we've had speakers on the subject of equity in public transit. We've had Elvia speaking on electric vehicles. We've had agile transportation. And there was another one too, and I can't remember it. But yes?
Would it be of interest to have somebody, say, from Montgomery County come and talk about how they have electrified their bus fleet?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing that.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
Is that, I assume that's you, Elvia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you make that contact and set it up? Yeah. Wonderful, thank you. So as I was saying, this is normally, there's a slot for comments by members of the public. We have no connection to the public, regrettably, but it's our earnest hope that that possibility will be made available to us at some time in the future. Next item of regular business is the status of legislation. The only item of legislation that I'm aware of is an ordinance which we have discussed in the past and which is now complete. It's 03120, which was on the subject of non-motorized vehicles on sidewalks in Annapolis. The board made comments on the legislation, suggested additions to the language in that legislation, and at the last meeting of the City Council, that ordinance was passed. There was one vote of no, that was Alderman Ross Arnett. And I intend to have a conversation with him about about this general topic because it would be nice to get his support for some of the things that the board thinks is sensible. So that ordinance has passed. They are now working on a language for a resolution, which will be considered and I hope passed by the city council on the subject of the state ordinance on this subject, which presently by default makes it illegal to ride a bicycle on any sidewalk in the state unless the locality permits it. And our suggestion, and the city council appears to be inclined toward supporting it, is to reverse that default so that it is allowed unless forbidden. That is the situation in 46 other states and DC. Maryland is in a very small minority of forbidding it. So that's the status of 03120. I'm not aware of any other legislative developments. Do any of you have comments on legislation either in process or about to be introduced? Hearing nothing, I'll go on to status of membership, which I think may have been covered. We think we have 3 vacancies at the moment, and one ward vacancy and 2 at-large vacancies, which I hope Hillary and the mayor will turn their attention to. If you have candidates that you think would usefully fill out our full membership, by all means, let me know, and I will try to pass the word on. Okay. What I'd like to do now is to go around the table for input from every member of the board. And in doing so, I will just give you advance notice that we had a meeting of me, Carol Kelly, and Kara on the subject of
Beth.
transit, and Beth also on the subject of transit. And we have each carved out special areas to attend to. I'll start with myself. Frankly, I've done nothing since our meeting, but I'm starting to get the wheels rolling. But anyway, let's just go around the table. I'll start with my list. Beth is not here. I'm next. Elvia, you're next on my list.
Well, there are a number of bills in the General Assembly that have to do with transportation, like the Clean Cars Act. And I believe there's another, I'm looking at my list right now. I think there's another one on electric buses. But I could give a summary of this at the next meeting.
That would be fine. Do you see a role for the Transportation Board in the legislature's consideration of those bills?
Well, I mean, I think that folks on this board ought to be aware, and if the bill looks like something that you'd like to support, I mean, it's very important now to get written testimony in, and it's all online. You have to have it in 48 hours ahead. But certainly, if there's a bill that needs support, you know, we ought to be aware of that.
Okay, great. And what's the timing? Can we wait to the next meeting to act on this?
Yeah, the hearing on the Clean Cars Act is on the 28th in the House, and there's no Senate hearing scheduled yet. So, I mean, I can send information around about that bill, but it would have to be after this meeting.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. Next, among those people who are attending is Kara on board? No, she is not.
here.
David.
Carol's here.
Yeah. Oh.
Did you
No,
call
no,
him?
No, it was Kara Plewinski.
Oh, sorry.
David DeQuincio, you're next.
Yeah, a couple of things. Just some goings on in the transportation related press that I think are important for everyone to be aware of. There is a lot of chatter about how the pandemic has caused dramatic transit ridership declines, and a lot of hand wringing is going on about will it ever come back? And there are even some who are using the whole pandemic situation to argue that the pandemic spells the end of cities, which is absurd because if cities were not able to withstand outbreaks and pandemics, cities would have disappeared from the face of the earth three or 4,000 years ago. Cities have bounced back from all manner of things. They adapt, and they may not come back the same way, but they come back. So I just want to remind you all to be to review that, or to treat that kind of chatter and any of those kinds of articles with a very skeptical eye. And at the same time, it's true that we can't unknow what we now know, that a lot of work can be done from home, certain kinds of work, but then there are essential workers that have to be able to get to hospitals or to be able to do the other jobs they do. So just wanted to remind everybody not to be too quick to assume that what some of these doomsayers are saying is going to pan out. Then one thing I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that the Planning Commission is in the midst of the comp plan process, which is mandated by state law every 10 years. And it's always a painful and difficult process. It always seems to get underway too late. What I would like to volunteer to do, unless anyone has an objection, since I used to serve on the Planning Commission, and I know a lot of the people still there, is to check in with them and see where they're at, and if they have drafted any transportation language they want us to look at, or if they would welcome input from us on how that language ought to read. So I'll take their temperature unless anyone has an objection, and report at the next meeting what I hear.
Are you okay if I characterize your offer to be a liaison?
I'm good with that, yes.
Thanks.
I'm thrilled with that.
I am too. This is wonderful.
And then the next thing, I just wanted to take the temperature of my fellow board members on this topic. I've been thinking about what kinds of things might we poke and prod, how we might stir the pot a little bit, and without biting off more than we can chew. One issue that's might be worthy of examination on our part is the whole situation with what is called level of service. If the phrase level of service is I'd like to see a show of hands who is familiar and with this concept and what this is, and to whom is this a new thing?
Are you speaking of what is characterized otherwise as just ridership?
No, this is a traffic engineering concept called level of service. And it's what traffic engineers use to characterize the traffic flow of intersections. And so if you are a real estate developer and the laws in the state you're working in, that you have a project that you're pulling together, if they require that a traffic study be done, very likely you you will be hiring a traffic engineer who will tell the authority having jurisdiction, whether it's a whatever, whether it's a county planning board or a municipal, a local board, that once the development is in place, such and such an intersection will go from a level B performance to a level C or something like that. So if I could see a show of hands, like, yes, this is something I've heard of and familiar with.
I have heard of that, and I've heard intersections being characterized as failed intersections on
Right,
precisely that scoring.
right. Okay, well,
My exposure is limited, David, but it's specifically related to what is background noise with the Forest Drive study.
yes, it
and
figures
it's
into the
been
Forest
utilized
Drive thing, yes.
in the, not just the planning, but the implementation of traffic control in Annapolis in regard to Forest Drive.
Right.
And I'm particularly excited about that. I will comment later that I now have a real interest in Forest Drive as a project of ours.
Right. Well, in some cities like ours that are trying to improve pedestrian and bicycle access, there is a growing movement to push back on level of service being the only acceptable way to do these kinds of traffic analyses. And I think in California now, statewide, it's optional, or it's left to counties and local governments whether to use it or not, whereas in other states it's required.
So this is, if I understand this, the pushback on this is reasonable if, for example, our most treasured street in Annapolis, Main Street, would be categorized as a failed street.
Right, whereas from a traditional city planning standpoint, it's a hugely successful street.
Yes.
And so what level of service tends to do, it prioritizes the flow of cars, and you can make a case for it, out in rural and exurban areas. It is really not contextually, my opinion at least, not, and this is a growing opinion among urban planners and such, that it is not suitable for, certainly not for historic cities and other dense kinds of environments. The reason I bring it up is that in the last year of my time on the Planning Commission, there were some projects that developers brought to the table that seemed pretty reasonable, but that residents opposed to any new development in the city, who want to torpedo these projects, will pull some money together, and they'll hire their own traffic engineer who will trot out level of service as a way to torpedo the project. And that whole way of grading an intersection is really weighted toward leading to the conclusion that roads have to be expanded. You could even go so far as to say that the whole civil engineering profession, or that part of the civil engineering profession that is focused on road building, design that whole system in order to encourage road building. It's not too far of a stretch to say that. And so on Planning Commission, we would constantly hear from these traffic engineers hired by development opposed residents. Now, there could be other reasons why the development was unsuitable. And part of what we always do on Planning Commission is, we would push the developer pretty hard if we thought they were trying to cram too much onto a given, chunk of land, we would negotiate them down. And when we thought we had something that was suitable for that location, then we'd put conditions on the table, et cetera. So, but some good projects got shot down on that basis. And in some cases where in my opinion, it was inappropriate to apply the level of service metric. It's one thing to apply it on Ritchie Highway going through Arnold and Severna Park and all of that. There are a lot of places here in the city where it's inappropriate. So my question is, we could initiate and we could put the question to the planning and zoning staff. In other words, we could adopt, now whether it would be the form of a resolution or whatever, and we could kind of start this whole conversation by asking planning and zoning staff, in what zones and what parts of the city do they believe that an alternative method, and there are alternative methods for carrying out traffic studies, should be used. And then we could pool that with input from other sources, and this would lead to a draft legislation that would, once we have a consensus about what the changes should be, the legislation would empower planning and zoning, and perhaps and maybe it would require the planning commission to approve a plan whereby that would outline what parts of the city should LOS not be used. And
Dave,
so,
question, does the city ordinance presently oblige them to consider that?
It's not clear. There's not a law or a regulation that I'm aware of that specifically requires them to, and that's partly why these opponents trot out LOS, because there isn't, as I understand it, there isn't any guidance there is no city ordinance that says yes or no. So what this would do, it would identify it would identify those parts of the city where it's inappropriate and shouldn't be used. And it would give the planning commission and planning and zoning staff a leg to stand on to say, this is why we didn't use LOS to evaluate this particular project, because this particular project is in the area where the city code now says it shouldn't be used. And I don't know whether or not this has a snowball's chance in hell of actually coming to reality. But I think it would at least be worthwhile to start the process and see where it goes. And if it goes down in flames, so be it. We'll move on to something else.
Can I ask a question? Is this also related to level of service where questions about parking that developers must provide is questioned with minimums?
Well, that's another issue, but they're treated really separately. They are interrelated, and in some cases, one of the reasons why a particular intersection doesn't, quote unquote, perform well under level of service is that people are driving around looking for parking because they don't have the kind of real-time information that in this day and age they ought to have, that says, hey, there's a parking space available in such and such a garage, and here's how to get there. Which reminds me of a separate thing. I'll get to that in a second. But so to answer your question, the two are related, but LOS looks only at on an intersection by intersection basis. Do you have a totally free flowing flow of cars through that? It's very narrow. It's very much a tunnel vision thing. It just looks at are cars flowing freely and unimpeded through this intersection or not.
All right.
So the other
That's-
thing about parking is there have been fits and starts of dialogue over the years about and efforts to get into the city's capital program, an effort to improve parking data availability. So imagine having, on newer vehicles, the display that shows your map and your radio situation, your media situation and all of that. That would show, find parking. You have a button you can press on it, find parking, and based on where you are in real time and based on real time data from garages and meters, some places are experimenting with this and are pretty far along with it. That you get real time information as to where a parking space might be, and the idea there is to reduce the amount of circulation and cruising around that people do trying to find parking. And I just wonder if anybody has heard anything that it seems to have fallen by the wayside. And I just wondering if anybody had heard anything about where that stands, or is it just dead and city's lost interest?
Dave, I don't know anything specific, but in regard to what I was going to comment on, I'm engaged with trying to make contact with Eric Lashinsky, and I attended his presentation of the comp plan and was impressed by how much thinking is in the comp plan already about transportation. And I think it's largely in Eric's head, it came from Eric's head. So I'm going to encourage interaction with him, at least on a get to know him basis, for what I'm going to talk about, Forest Drive and a project. But certainly in terms of parking or, the presence or the absence of this component, it would just be good to have him with us at some point, in some sort of meeting, greeting mode.
What was his last name?
Lashinsky, he's the comprehensive planner now who replaced Sally Nash when she took the directorship.
Okay. Correct my
Okay.
spelling when you get the notes.
It's Leshenskey. Lashinsky.
Thank you, Dave. Next is Carol. Since you've started, please continue.
All right, let me, I made some notes, which I will try not to be too formal with. Coming out of specifically the small transit meeting that we had, I did commit myself further to thinking about, still at this point, mostly, focus on interaction, cooperation between the county and the city on transit. And then I connected that to our what I had gained from our presentation by Arjan Von Arnsdale on the possibilities that exist for the use of Uber connections for enhancement of transit in Annapolis. And he went into great detail, of course, much of which I didn't understand. But he's definitely a figure in my head right now as a possibility. Well, in exploring it a little bit further with Arjan, I found that he had met with Eric Lashinsky and Brian Cahalan regarding, in general terms, and I always apologize that my terms are quite general because I have no technical expertise. They were going to talk about Uber and city transit, and that conversation probably went in a number of directions, but Specifically, it resulted in a comment to Eric that he requoted to me that I'd like to read to you. This will all be part of my attention to what might be done to contribute to Forest Drive as a problem and a uniting of transit efforts with the county and the city. As I've made a point of, that connection is already in place. And that bus we talked about earlier, the gold bus going to Anne Arundel Community College, is a joint effort. So Arjan noted that they said that, you know, the city representatives, Brian and Eric. And by the way, I've been successful in talking to Eric, but I haven't reached, Brian, but I haven't reached Eric yet. Anyway, Arjan said that they talked about an official pronouncement. Arjan suggested a pilot project without any startup costs, where the city only pays for the subsidies on transit trips. For those of you who were at his presentation, you probably know better than I do what he meant in terms of connecting drivers to places along their route.
Carol, by the way, that is the presentation I forgot to mention. Arjan van Andel, who used to be on this transportation board and is now head of the county's transportation, their board gave a presentation to us on the subject of using Uber to fill in some of these on-demand transportation needs that the city is presently covering. And he does, what he's trying to talk the city into is running at least a demonstration experiment using Uber on a partly subsidized basis.
Yes,
but anyway,
and you see that to a small extent he's had some success, because the return he got was to, and specifically, that's why I bring us into it, the two city representatives suggested to Eric that the transportation board look into identifying a specific project that could be part of this experiment in joint Uber city subsidy interaction. And I personally, I'll leave aside some of this quoting from what Arjan said. I would like to see us think about that in terms of what might be applied to the Forest Drive problem. I haven't done anything specific. I get a little winded when I talk too much, which is good for me. And see what we could do to hopefully come up with a board-generated project idea, and then use it as a sort of a touchstone, a basis for connecting with other groups, such as the Eastport Study, Forest Drive Study Group, and community groups that are concerned about what to do about the Forest Drive problem.
Now, if memory serves, Carol, in our conversation, Kara suggested taking on an examination of what we called agile transportation. Is that your recollection? And I wonder if you and she should get together on this.
Well, I personally would not take that sidetrack because it sounds to me that although that would be an interesting conceptual concern and interest, I would much rather have us move forward with something that we could do programmatically that would engage us with city officials. This is the first time I think the first time in my history, a long history on the board, in which there's been an opening for a direct interaction in regard to a specific project between the city and the board. And I, for one, hate to pass up that opportunity.
No, I'm suggesting we seize it. And that she already indicated an interest in this general subject of agile transportation, which this fits into.
It does, of course, right. So what are you saying next?
I'm only suggesting that you and she come up with some demonstration projects that you think are strong candidates?
Well, I think that that certainly goes beyond the limits of my technical ability in regard to planning, even something as simple as planning, let alone traffic engineering. And I would like to encourage us to keep it as a board-wide focus, as something maybe that we only give some attention to in a routine way to examine it. I'd be happy to keep our minds on it with Kara's cooperation and probably greater insight. And I certainly would encourage David to, to come in on what may be the wild and crazy aspects of this, David, in terms of how I'm presenting it and what are the real possibilities. I know there's concern about Uber as a commercial, as a corporate enterprise, and as a force on our horizon now in terms of transit and everything else. But others of you could address that much more knowledgeably than I can.
Okay,
Carol, Carol, if I may, real quick. The meeting last year where Arjun was talking about the possibilities of Uber, I may have gone a little overboard in my comments, but now might be a good time to clarify some of my concerns. Being an engineer, I love running experiments and gathering data and assessing, okay, what are the data telling us about how well this experiment worked? What did we learn from it? If I could be satisfied that Uber, and I probably can be, that Uber is serious about just offering its tools and not dictating to the city what to do, then or any other technology company, then I'm certainly willing to and supportive of the idea of running some experiments as long as we know, okay, here's how the data is going to be gathered and here's how it's going to be interpreted and all of that. Can you pardon me 1 second? I just have to let it.
Let's see, Zoe, you will be up next.
Sorry about that. I have 2 rambunctious dogs and I have to feed them in separate rooms because the bigger one will muscle the smaller one out of the way and eat his food as well as hers. So anyway, so yeah, I'm it just if you haven't looked this up on YouTube, I think you can find it there. It's worth watching. The General Motors 1939 Futurama video, which is a brilliant piece of marketing. It's basically a big corporation telling cities, we've got the answer to, the modern answer to all your transportation problems. And cities by and large went for it because the federal money was there to do it and et cetera, et cetera. Now I get that Uber and General Motors are very different, that Uber is offering software and technology tools. They're not going to be building an expressway through or telling the American public that they ought to build expressways and bulldoze their historic neighborhoods, usually minority neighborhoods, that it's a different kind of a thing. But I'm just wary of a big corporation that says, hey, we've got the answer to all your problems. Now, if Uber is saying we have tools that you can use to solve your own problems, that I can support.
Well, that sounds to be a part of his sale. He gave figures and numbers that I, again, couldn't interpret probably as wisely as others, but it seemed that he was convincing enough that there is gain for the city rather than just the need to spend money in a different direction that is in cooperation with Uber, who ultimately does gain a profit from the whole initiative. So you see, I mean, Kurt, and this is addressed to you, and one reason that I shy away from taking on something like this, and I'm not falsely humble about this, is that I don't have the tools to assess it properly,
Mhm.
but I think I can tell winners often when I when I hear them. And even if just in terms of action, of a proactive thing for the city and a private entity, or the city and the county, in something like this, in regard to Forest Drive, in regard to the county's emphasis on the parole plan to incorporate its oversight of Forest Drive, both between Parole Town Center
Mhm.
and the highway part of Forest Drive. It's
Okay.
a logical connect for city regional transit
Great.
cooperation of some sort.
My take on Arjan's presentation was that since he is now an Uber employee and is engaged in business development, that they're looking toward the long term and establishing basically contracts with municipalities and other authorities to provide transportation services as a part of their business.
They
So
do
they
exactly
certainly
what-
have a self-interest track that they're following.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but the question is, can that serve the city's transportation needs?
Well, that's the question that I'm putting on the table.
Yeah. Okay, could we move on then to Zoe?
Okay, good evening, everyone. For those new members, I think it was, I'm Zoe Johnson and I represent the Naval Academy on the Transportation Board. And my interests on this group lie in general congestion in and around the Naval Academy and the city of Annapolis at large, as it relates to special events and any emergency response and just traffic congestion in general. And also in bike path and pedestrian access and safety improvements. And so I have a couple updates that I wanted to share. One has to do with emergency response and evacuation and congestion, which is of concern for the Naval Academy as well as the city. The DOD awarded the city of Annapolis, and I've talked about this before, a grant of about $500,000 to do a study to look at vulnerability associated with extreme events and other disruptions, and in and around the installation, but looking at 3 of the 4 major evacuation routes out of the city, and how vulnerability, what are the vulnerabilities and what are specific improvements that could mitigate some of those vulnerabilities. That project included a component to do a 30% design of city as well as state owned traffic signals to develop intelligent transportation signals on, I think, I can't remember, maybe I can't remember the exact number of signals. I think 30 of the 51 signals that would enable them to be timed and sequenced and to do reverse flow and really greatly improve both congestion as well as the primary interest from a DoD perspective was evacuation and assistance during emergency events. So the RFP closes on January 28th. The city did receive a lot of interest in the pre-proposal meeting on the project in general, which we'll be looking at a broad set of vulnerabilities beyond traffic. But for the purpose of this group, I'm very interested in the project and will continue to update this group on the project award and any of the findings and as the design of those intelligent transportation signals moves forward.
Excellent. You expect multiple bids?
I would anticipate there were about maybe 47 people on the pre-proposal meeting, and some of those obviously were multiple representative from different consulting firms, so it's hard to tell. But I think there's pretty. I'm hearing there's a lot of interest. So, what the project will set the city up for is to be competitive for additional future funding that DoD can bring to the table to fix or mitigate some of these vulnerabilities outside of the fence line. So as we say in the community. So I think there can also, we're also interested in looking at some flood vulnerabilities on transportation systems in and around City Dock. The City Dock redevelopment project is moving forward, as is the Hillman Garage. But there are a lot of other transportation routes in and around City Dock, Prince George Street, Compromise Street, Main Street, King George Street, that aren't part of that redevelopment project, but that are impacted by flooding in one way or the other, as well as access into the Naval Academy at Gate 1. So this project will look at those vulnerabilities and then also identify maybe specific projects that we could then target for support for federal funding in the future to remedy. So barring any questions on that project, it is a year-long planning project once it's awarded. So I will keep you all up to date on that. The other update is this weekend I saw that Bike AAA put together a new Facebook page. Maybe it's not new, or just it came across my Facebook feed with a new map of their bike path priorities for the area, including the priority that they've voiced for a segment of on 450, 435 King George Street that runs through the Naval Academy. We are continuing to work with SHA and other partners on real estate issues associated with that proposed bike pedestrian pathway. I don't have any specific updates. The real estate issues take a long time when it comes to the Navy, but we're continuing to cooperatively work with our partners and hopefully move that project forward in one fashion or another. Those are the updates I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Zoe, I don't have a question, but I saw that same reference, I guess it was in the Capitol, to the bike group. And I'm wondering, Kurt, if that might be a group we could ask to make a presentation to us.
I'm sorry, which group?
What's it called, Zoe? I don't have the
Bike AAA?
Oh, they've already made a presentation
Have they?
to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe in terms of what they've recently developed, a follow-up presentation about this map, to just, reinforce our ties to them.
Yeah. That's certainly a possibility. I'll look into it. In the meantime, I will send around that link that Zoe mentioned there. That's something we can all look at right now.
Especially in terms of the ordinance that the city has passed. Anything with map and data sounds like a useful material now.
Okay. Thanks so much, Zoe. Vince, you have the floor.
So first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here. So I'll just introduce myself since I don't really have any news from before. But I'm Vince Harriman, have two young boys, well, not so young anymore, but live in the neighborhood, I think fairly close to Kurt, right around the corner. I'm interested in a lot of different things in transportation. As Carol and Zoe just mentioned, I'm also interested in vulnerable users, pedestrians and cyclists. My own neighborhood, for example, even though it's a very low-speed neighborhood, doesn't have any sidewalks. And having two young kids that travel in and around Annapolis a lot. My neighborhood is not dangerous, but we have plenty of neighborhoods in Annapolis like mine that don't have sidewalks and other access that present more risk for other users. So I'm particularly interested in that kind of thing. And then also, as David started with, I'm very interested in how towns like Annapolis deal with pressure from developers that's both fair, to the city and fair to the end users and the developers themselves. So, and then the last thing is my own personal pet peeve. I work in construction and I work with many, many developers. What I'd be interested in helping to contribute to this is how we bond repairs and how we look at development repairs and even individual homeowner repairs, because I see and I care deeply that we allow bond release on shoddy repairs throughout the city. And I think it has slowly degraded the infrastructure. And this is not an Annapolis problem, this is an America problem, where we allow curb cuts or street cuts or whatever, and then the repairs are very substandard. And then we move forward and release those monies with impacted infrastructure. So I'd like to see if there's a way that we can look at that together. So that's me.
Thanks so much. In that connection, Vince, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there have been discussions between residents of West Annapolis and the city of Annapolis on speeding on Melvin Avenue. And there have been suggestions from a few of the members of my community that both speed bumps and traffic circles be one of those options be chosen. The city is dead set against speed bumps. They just don't do that anymore for lots of good reasons. And the traffic circle idea is less appealing to me personally than the so-called cycle track, where you narrow the street, you deliver the slowing of traffic speed by narrowing the street, sending a visual signal that this is not a high-speed street anymore. And Melvin is very wide. It invites high-speed traffic. It really looks a little bit like a high-speed highway.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very familiar with that. And I'm most interested in that in the context of we have many streets in Annapolis that fall into that category where their use and their surroundings are strictly residential and low speed, and yet we have speedways. So
that's right. The configuration that I'm particularly fond of is the cycle track, where you move the parking lane out into the street to create a wide strip for cyclists and pedestrians, which is protected by the line of parked cars. That would send the visual signal that calms traffic and would also provide safe cycling lanes.
Yep.
Kurt, if I could interrupt for a moment.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that there is a meeting on that Melvin Avenue project tomorrow. So if anyone is interested, I know I've already sent you a link, but if anyone else is interested, send me an email and I'll send you a link.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Hillary. So thanks very much, Vince. John Purnell, welcome to this group. Tell us something about yourself and your interests and where you'd like to see us go.
Well, thank you. Now that I have the floor, there'll be 20 minutes of silence so I get caught up on the notes. Where's my? I live in Park Place by the Westin over at Westgate Circle.
You and
Claire and Ellie and
yeah,
Justin.
Ellie, everybody lives there.
Well, we were like others. We lived in the big house down in Murray Hill, and my kids have grown and went to college, and we decided to make our life simple, and that's how we did it. So as a consequence, I am a regular user of the circulator. I take it, I'd say 4 to 8 times a week. So I know all the drivers very well, and I know their routes, and I know what their pet peeves are. So I would offer that I'm interested in anything related to improving the circulator and making it run more efficiently. For a career, I run an IT consulting firm, but it primarily works in the areas of transportation. So our largest client is BWI Airport, and we do work with. I'm probably doing work with about 6 airports right now. We've done some work in light transit. I've done work in trucking and actually in ocean-going vessels. I'm not a big ocean-going expert. I know a lot more about trucks and air, and some about trains. But I'm also a member of the BWI Business Partnership, which keeps me in touch with what's going on around the airport. But that is full, chock-a-block full of everybody that is transportation related in the county. And I'm actually one of the founding members of the transportation think tank at the BWI Business Partnership. So I'm interested also in participating in the regionalization of Annapolis, the connecting to county, connecting to state transportation resources. And if I can use my contacts or knowledge to help make that a reality, I would love to do it.
Thank you. Your experience sounds rich and relevant. Thanks so much for joining the board.
You missed the R word. It's not rewarding.
When Carol Kelly runs on about how little she knows and can bring to any consideration of anything, it's because of people like you, John. And you're not the only one. They have swarmed around me for a decade, and I'm truly awed by
You
all.
know, this would be a terrible committee if we were all technical experts. We
Well,
need
yeah,
the policy and big picture stuff that you bring.
Well, and I truly try to represent the community, even at its simplest, most humble level. And, you know, transit is certainly relevant for that. But even in terms of something like Forest Drive, which I'm a little fixated on now, the people on that street and using that street are the voices that we need to hear as well.
Yep.
John, you mentioned the circulator, which serves you because of where you live very well. One of the things that I've mentioned several times to the city, and Kwaku can verify this, that I'm somewhat disturbed that the city is silent on its strongest attribute, and that is that it's free. I think there should be a great big sign on the circulator vehicle that says free. A lot of people don't use it only because they don't realize that fact.
I still pay $1 a trip.
That's fine, but there are people
but I just give it to the driver.
Yeah, that's fine. But there are people for whom that's an important factor.
Is the St. John's rep on the call?
We don't have one.
Okay. That's an area that needs some discussion, and I hope we had a St. John's rep, because it is taking a pretty much wasted trip over to St. John's most of the time. I think there's one individual that occasionally gets picked up over there. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm a technologist, so I would endorse some of the things that I want to say Vince was talking about, where we can use technology. Both the Uber thing and the parking guidance thing are all stuff that I think we should be exploring.
Okay. Thanks so much. If I've missed anybody, I think I've gotten through the whole thing. And I have just was there something?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Vince.
I am a graduate of St. John's College. If you need somebody that could reach out to them, or are you looking for somebody to represent that neighborhood?
Yeah, that would be fine. I think you could do double duty if that's something
Why
you
not?
could contact them and see if they're pleased with your serving to fill that slot.
I was also a writer of the circulator for, up and down Main Street, but I used it because I worked at Chase Home on King George and Maryland. And I know that there was motivation initially by the city to get the circulator to Maryland Avenue for business purposes, for commercial purposes. But I certainly used it as an employee with a connecting route to the city bus that I used to come into downtown Annapolis. So I was kind of a singular example of a way it was useful. But I know the students were always interested in, St. John's was interested in connectors, particularly to places like New Carrollton that existed in Annapolis. St. John's for a while was a great responder to efforts to enhance community services because they could do that for their students. So
the students who are good walkers have not shown up.
Right.
All right. And the one person that has nothing to do, that gets on there, has nothing to do with St. John's.
But when they want to get to New Carrollton, they care about connecting.
Maybe I haven't seen them. I can certainly ask the circulator drivers and John and the people at SP Plus. What are you finding there? Do you guys get the reports from the circulator?
We have the transportation department report, which is circulated.
Okay, I assume that's a distillation of the data that I watch the drivers enter. They enter virtually every passenger gets marked.
Yes, when we get to Kwaku in a few minutes, maybe he can speak to that.
I have one comment on the St. John's is that the students have not been there this last semester. It's my understanding they're returning. So I don't know if your observations are just over the last 6 months or since the pandemic has started.
Oh no,
but
they predate a year when
Okay,
something. Yeah,
okay, yeah.
it's and I love the idea of it going to St. John's, and I love the idea of including St. John's in the circuit, but we need to have a dialogue with St. John's about what's going to make it effective for them, because it's not meeting a need, or there is no need.
And there are there are possible extensions of the circulator route that might, in fact, generate more demand.
I agree.
Okay, I'm the last on the list, so I'll mention just a couple of things. This is the time when we prepare our annual report. I've prepared a draft annual report of the board for the past year and sent it to you. I encourage you to send me any corrections, additions that you think ought to be in it. If there's any discussion of the draft, we can do it now, but otherwise I'll just move on. The only item that I would like to flag for attention, and it's something I'm totally ignorant about, but it seems quite important. The city is taking its first steps toward reconstruction of the Hillman Garage. And they're in conversations with a public partner, with parties for a public-private partnership. I don't know what the characteristics of that partnership will be, but I have a terrible fear. And the fear is that it will be a closed system, which is operated by a private operator and which dedicates all of the funds generated to parking uses. Many cities around the country look at parking as a source of revenue to subsidize other parts of the transportation system. For example, bus transit and so forth, or bicycle lane construction. So I think that's something that we should become knowledgeable about and provide our advice on what constraints this public-private partnership ought to be subject to. I personally would be in favor of using parking revenues for purposes other than parking. But yes.
The contract has already been awarded to Annapolis Mobility Resiliency Partners. It was awarded a couple weeks ago, and in it's very complex contract, and involved a lot of lawyers on both sides to negotiate. Some of the revenue, I don't know how it all works with, they on the parking side to design, build, operate, and maintain the garage. But additionally, some of the revenue will support the design and construction of City Dock from the resiliency measures. So
yeah, I was aware of that.
I don't know about additional revenue beyond the parking garage to support other transportation needs. So it may be something to look into. Some of it may be, our hands may be tied a little bit in that the contract has been already written and awarded, and certain specifications have been established.
Have you seen the contract?
I haven't seen the contract, but I participated in a number of the briefings.
Okay.
I represent the installation and coordinate on the resiliency front. So I've been paying more attention to the resiliency measures and the funding and the design and the timelines for those than the transportation piece.
Okay, maybe I should get a copy of the contract and send it around for those who may be interested in it. I'm personally skeptical about lockbox approaches to parking, in the sense that many jurisdictions use parking as a source of revenue to support other transportation needs, and I think it would be good if we would preserve that flexibility. So that's all I had. If Kwaku is still present, can you give us a transportation department update? I see he is listed here, but I'm not. Quaco, the floor is yours if you are still here. Well, I think he might have stepped away. So let me throw the floor open for new business as might be suggested by board members. Hearing nothing, I think we may be at the end of our meeting. May I hear a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
moved.
All in
Second.
favor?